Welcome to this Considered Opinions podcast.
I'm Dougal.
And I'm Celia. Thank you for joining us. Have you ever heard the quote, "Sometimes I sits and thinks, and sometimes I just sits"? It prompted a thought in us about the value of sitting and thinking and coming to considered opinions in a smartphone world.
We certainly have a society now where people are permanently on some device or other. And it means that we don't have time anymore to sit and think.
I recently read an article talking about smartphone addiction, actually, but the comments were full of people saying how they saw devices and smartphones taking over our social lives. And one of the stories was this person was at a restaurant and they observed a young couple come in, and this couple had taken time to get dressed up and come out to a restaurant, and they sat down, got the menu, had a look through, discussed together what they were going to have, put their order in, and then promptly picked up their phones and started playing on the phones and sat in silence.
Instead of talking to each other.
And it did kind of prompt the question of why bother?
Yes.
But it's often such a habit that I think we don't realise how much we use our phones.
And it's not just phones, it's other devices as well. It's other social media as well. How much time are we on Facebook or WhatsApp or
X?
How much valuable information are we actually getting from these devices? Yes, we might be imbibing a huge amount of information, but how much of that information is actually useful, valuable information?
Well, that's a hard thing to work out, because when we have so much information coming at us, we get information overload, and that will lead to things like the thin slicing of people, which can lead to division, because we want to box people, we want to box information relevant.
We want quick answers, quick solutions, and if we're spending all of our time on our phone, we're not spending time processing that information and trying to make sense of it, which is what we would normally do in the downtime.
And interestingly enough, having quiet time, which you might now we often interpret it as boredom, but having that time actually prompts creativity. When we've got time to just sit and think and be, and we can process stuff that's gone on in our lives, but we can also have time to have creative processes going on. And it's the creative processes that help to build a better future.
I remember as a child being told, if you don't find something to do, I'll find something for you to do. And then you'd go off and you would be creative, you would find something to do. And usually it would end up in some great, fantastic story, like how I buried Dad's tools at a building site. I mean, there's all sorts of great stories along those lines, but if you don't have time to actually ponder these things, or you don't have time to actually come to A, as you say, creative solutions, or B, just to make sense of the information that you've imbibed over a period of time.
And I think the important thing is that we are human beings, not human doings. Sometimes we need that time to consider the information, consider events, and to really process it in a very thorough way. We spend so much time information gathering and not enough time information processing.
Yes.
And thinking things through deeply, thinking and considering the options and what we might call critical thinking, it brings us, what we end up with is a considered opinion. A well thought out, carefully thought out opinion or decision.
But we have to give ourselves time to actually cogitate and to spend time processing things.
And that means that things don't go in one ear and out the other.
Yeah.
That what we are taking in, we take the time to process.
What about taking time to not think and just be? Where you're not necessarily even processing, or are we always processing? And therefore, even if you're spending time not thinking, you are actually...
Well, that's what they say about dreams, isn't it? I always think of it as the brain filing these weird things that have mashed up together in your dream.
Yes.
It's actually
a way for you to contemplate or make sense of the world around you. Okay, so if you're sleeping, surely that's enough to... Or are we not sleeping? Is that part of the problem, that we're spending so much time on the phone, we're not getting a good night's sleep either?
I think that is also the case. And I think that what's also happening for us is that you reach a maximum point where you've got so much information and you haven't had time to process it all, and you haven't really had time to think things through carefully, come to your considered conclusions.
Yes.
What then happens is it's very easy for all really to be too much, and then it's easier to just shut off completely and not think. And I think that happens a lot with, we just want the short answer. We want to be told what to do. We want to just know what the answer is. I mean, this happens when I was at university, and people would put their hand up and say, you'd be learning this fabulous stuff, and people would put their hand up and say, do I need to know this for the exam?
Yes. So there's a point of overload where you stop caring about
growing and learning
and it's just, do I need this information or don't I need this information? Where is this useful? Where is it not? And you just want to be given it because there's so much information out there, you don't have time to actually step back and consider, what's the ramifications of this information? Where did it come from? How trustworthy is it? And asking all of those tricky questions that take time and deliberation. I think also we need to keep in mind that not all busyness is actually productive.
Well, that's an interesting thing in itself, because if you were to say to somebody, oh, how are you? How are you, Dougal?
Oh, I'm busy. Everyone's busy.
And that is the socially acceptable answer. You're not allowed to say, oh, well, I'm really good and I'm not being up to much. No,
I'm real chilled out today.
You have more value if you're busy.
If you're not busy, why aren't you busy?
You must not be so valuable.
Yes.
And that's part of our culture. And I think that what it means is that we've ended up with busyness is more valuable than productivity.
Yes. And sort of part of why that is a fallacy is that not all information or not all activities are as valuable as others. So you can spend all of your time bringing in a whole lot of information, but if it's rubbish information, then you haven't actually added or improved the picture very much. I mean, I can remember I used to do dimensional surveying, and you're measuring pillars, pipes, structural supports, things like that. And if you're trying to describe a box beam or an I-beam, you really only need 4 points and then a descriptor of what it is. So, your descriptor might be, it's an I-beam or it's a box beam. And then your 4 points are one end of the beam, the other end of the beam, a point for the height and a point for the width. In 4 points, you've described everything you need in surveying terms. And a modern way of doing that, you might get in a laser scanner, and the laser scanner will have millions of points. But in actual fact, when you come down to the basic surveying, you still only need 4 points and a descriptor to describe that beam.
And that's the important thing, I think, is that the information is out there, but like you said, it's not all necessarily useful information. So you could be in a meeting and it's really 15-20 minutes worth of information, but it takes you an hour and a half to 2 hours to cover it all. Partially that's because of human interactions, but there's also a lot of busy work going on there.
Yes.
And busy work has social cachet nowadays, but is it really beneficial to us as people? And is it really beneficial to us as a society?
Yes, there's an element of job creation going on in certain activities.
Well, this brings me to something I read about. It was like the secret diary of a civil servant in Whitehall. And they were talking about how their job, basically, it was part of a series of anonymous descriptions of what a job actually entails. And this one was particularly about a civil servant in Whitehall. And essentially their job was busy work. It was about meetings and writing some emails, and they actually admitted this, not in so many words, but what they said was most civil servants stay in their jobs for life because our skills don't transfer to the private sector very well.
Yes.
And I was like, well, that's because it's not really a skill.
Yes, yes.
You're just doing busy work. You're having Zoom meetings, so you can write down that you've had a Zoom meeting. You're writing an email, so you can say I've written an email, and producing reports that nobody's ever going to read. This is the creation of extraneous information, and what we mean by not all information is equally valuable.
Okay, shifting things up a bit. Are there benefits to having downtime, to having alone time?
Yes, there's the process of being able to take time to think things through, to possibly process what you have taken in recently, the information that you've got. There's also the creativity that we've already talked about. And I think sometimes having that downtime helps us to examine the sorts of people that we are. And often we don't want to do that.
We might not like what we see in that lonely time when you're alone with your thoughts. Do you like yourself?
That it's a question, I think, that is hard to ask and hard to answer sometimes.
But if you were to try and come to terms with yourself and liking yourself, and or improving yourself if you don't like what you see, you kind of got to spend that time alone with yourself. But if you're forever on your phone or you're on social media or whatever, you're never going to get that time to actually, self-contemplate.
And people can do it with keeping busy with activities, though, to be honest. If you haven't taken the time to think carefully and to really just be still a minute, you can do it with activities. If you're rushing from one thing to another and seeing this person and seeing that person, you've not actually got time to process the information that's coming at you and to formulate your own opinions. And sometimes with the information out there, there's so much going on, we look for our most trusted source to have sifted through the information and formed an opinion for us. And we need to really be taking some time to form our own opinions, what you might call critical thinking. And I think this is one of the issues that we've had over the last little while, is that we have outsourced our brains. We are outsourcing our thinking and our thought, our decision making and opinion forming processes, and outsourcing them. And often it's to the least trustworthy people.
Yes, that's why people fall for the propaganda, whether it be from the legacy media or from the politicians, because that's, you're listening to those people, and so you focus on what is being said there, and and you even start to take your values from that in terms of, that's what they're talking about, therefore that's what I should be having as my priorities.
I would even argue that we're taking our opinions from the least qualified people in the celebrities and the influencer culture.
Oh gosh, don't they have messed up lives? And you're right, we take our opinions from them, and yet they, from observing their own lives, you ought to conclude that they're not the sort of people that you ought to...
They're not the soundest thinkers.
They're not the soundest thinkers.
So what we're really encouraging at the moment is to unplug a little bit and to take the time to consider the information that you're getting, the sources of your information, the quality of your information, and engaging in some logical thought processes and creative thought processes, and forming some considered opinions of your own that will stand you in good stead going forward.
Thank you for joining us for this Considered Opinions podcast. We look forward to seeing you again next time, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.